On my 68th birthday, my son told me I was no longer capable of living alone. He slid a brochure across the dinner table, Meadow Pine Senior Living, color photographs of smiling elderly people playing chess, and said the room was already reserved. I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at my son. Then I reached into my breast pocket and set a manila envelope beside the birthday cake my daughter-in-law had bought from a grocery store and not bothered to have inscribed. I said, "I've made some arrangements too." He had no idea what was inside that envelope. He was about to find out. Before we go further, please subscribe to Shadow Vengeance and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened. My name is not important. What matters is that for 31 years I worked as a forensic accountant. I found fraud for a living, hidden transfers, falsified ledgers, shell companies masquerading as legitimate vendors. I built cases that sent people to federal prison. I retired at 65 with a clean reputation, a paid-off house in Asheville, North Carolina, and the belief that my son, my only child, had turned out to be a decent man. I was wrong about that last part. It took me 14 months to accept it, and another 4 to prove it. My son is 41. I'll call him my son throughout this, because that relationship is the wound that never quite closes, even when you're the one holding the scalpel. He married his wife 7 years ago. She came from money that had mostly disappeared by the time I met her, which explained a great deal about her attitude toward money that belonged to others. Her father, who I'll call my son's father-in-law, was a former real estate developer who had declared bankruptcy twice, and still dressed like he hadn't. He involved himself in his daughter's marriage to a degree I found unusual from the start, but chalked up to cultural closeness. I should have chalked it up to something else. My wife passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and ruthless, gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis. After she died, my son and his wife came around more often. I was grateful then. Grief makes you grateful for presence without asking too many questions about motive. They had a key to the house. They helped with groceries. My daughter-in-law organized my wife's closet when I couldn't bring myself to do it. I thanked her for that. I meant it. The first loan request came 8 months after my wife's funeral. My son needed $30,000. A business opportunity, he said. His restaurant consulting firm had a chance to buy into a small chain expanding into the Southeast. He showed me a prospectus. I transferred the money. He said he'd repay it within 18 months. 18 months passed. I mentioned repayment once, gently. He said the deal had complications, but was still solid. I didn't press. He was my son. The second request came 4 months later. $22,000. Unexpected tax liability from his LLC. I transferred it. He signed a promissory note this time because I asked him to. His wife stood beside him when he signed it and smiled with every tooth showing. By the time I reached my 67th birthday, I had transferred $114,000 to my son across 11 separate transactions. I had not seen a single repayment. What I had seen was a new truck in his driveway, a vacation to Portugal, his wife documented extensively on social media, and custom closets installed in their guest bedroom that I later learned cost $9,000. I noticed all of this the way a forensic accountant notices things, quietly, without comment, storing information the way I had stored it for 3 decades. The moment I stopped giving my son the benefit of the doubt came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in the backyard when my son's car pulled into the driveway, which wasn't unusual. He had a key and sometimes stopped by without calling. What was unusual was that he didn't come inside. I could hear voices through the fence, his and his father-in-law's. I wasn't eavesdropping. They were simply not being careful. My son's father-in-law said he has to sign it before he figures out what it actually does. My son said, "He won't. He reads everything." His father-in-law said, "Then you get him when he's tired." Evening, after dinner, people sign things when they're tired. My son was quiet for a moment, then he said, "What if he gets the accounts audited?" His father-in-law said, "By then it won't matter. Everything will already be moved." I stood very still in the backyard for a long time after they left. Then I went inside, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where my wife and I had eaten breakfast together for 26 years. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't panic. I gather evidence. The next morning I called my attorney. a woman I'd worked with on several corporate fraud cases during my career. I told her what I had heard. She told me to document everything going forward. I told her I intended to do considerably more than that. Over the next 4 months, I installed security cameras covering every approach to my home and the interior of my office. I began recording all phone conversations. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. I was a party to every call that mattered. I hired a private financial investigator to conduct a quiet audit of every account that my son had any access to, including the joint account I had foolishly added him to 2 years earlier for emergency purposes. What that audit revealed was not a surprise to the forensic accountant part of my brain. It was a devastation to the father part. My son and his wife had made 27 withdrawals from the joint emergency account over 14 months, totaling $68,000. Most carried descriptions like home repair, reimbursement, or medical copay. I cross-referenced every date against my own calendar and bank records. I had authorized none of them. My signature appeared on 6 of those withdrawal slips. I had signed none of those slips. I had the originals in a fireproof safe. The signatures on the withdrawal records were not mine. Forgery. Across 6 separate transactions. Felony-level forgery. There was more. My son's father-in-law had incorporated a company called Meridian Property Services, LLC, 14 months prior, shortly after my wife died. Meridian had invoiced my son's consulting firm for consulting and management services totaling $41,000 over the previous year. My son's firm had then listed those payments as legitimate business expenses on documents I had co-signed as a silent investor when my son started the company. I had never heard of Meridian. The address for Meridian was a UPS store box in Hendersonville. The registered agent was my daughter-in-law's maiden name, a shell company, billing my son's firm, which had my money in it, for services that did not exist. Classic fraud. First week of forensic accounting curriculum. I documented everything. Every withdrawal slip. Every Meridian invoice. Every forged signature compared against authentic ones by a handwriting analyst I hired in Charlotte. Every bank transfer, every date, every amount, all of it organized into a binder that ran to 230 pages. I also quietly removed my son from the joint account, restructured my estate with my attorney, and changed my life insurance beneficiary from my son to the Asheville Children's Medical Foundation. I moved my investment accounts into an irrevocable trust. I had my physician conduct a full cognitive evaluation, which she documented in a signed letter confirming that I was in exceptional health and fully competent for all legal and financial decisions. I had suspected they might try that angle. I wanted it closed before they opened it. I did not confront my son. I waited. 31 years of forensic work teaches patience better than anything else. You wait for people to complete the pattern. Incomplete evidence gets cases thrown out. Complete evidence ends them. My 68th birthday fell on a Saturday in October. My son called 2 weeks before to say he and his wife wanted to take me to dinner. His father-in-law would join us. I said that sounded fine. My son seemed pleased by how agreeable I was. I had been very agreeable for 4 months. He had mistaken my stillness for decline. We met at a restaurant in downtown Asheville, a place with white tablecloths and a wine list. My son studied carefully before ordering a bottle. I suspected he had no intention of contributing to the bill. His wife wore a blazer and sat very straight. Her father ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without looking at the price, which was a habit I had observed every time we shared a meal, and which told you everything you needed to know about how he related to other people's resources. Dinner proceeded without incident until the dessert menus arrived. My son set his down without opening it, and looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. I had seen it on defendants preparing to offer a lesser admission to avoid discussing the larger crime. He said we needed to talk about my future. I said I was listening. His wife said that they had been worried about me. Living alone in a big house, managing finances alone at my age. She said the word alone 3 times in the first 4 sentences, which told me the framing had been rehearsed. Her father leaned forward and said that they had toured some excellent facilities, that Meadow Pines had a wonderful reputation, that transitioning sooner rather than later, while I still had full capacity to make the decision, was the responsible choice. He said the phrase full capacity with careful emphasis, like a man placing a chess piece. My son pulled the brochure from his jacket, slid it across the white tablecloth. Meadow Pines Senior Living, room already reserved. He said, "Dad, we've already handled the paperwork. We just need your signature." I looked at the brochure, then at my son, then at the manila envelope in my breast pocket, which I set on the table beside the grocery store birthday cake. "I've made some arrangements too," I said. My son's wife looked at the envelope the way my clients used to look at documents I produced in depositions, like she wanted to know what was inside it and was afraid to find out simultaneously. I did not open the envelope yet. I asked my son a question first. I asked him whether he could explain Meridian Property Services. The table went quiet. His father-in-law picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. My son said he didn't know what I was referring to. I said that was interesting, because Meridian had invoiced his consulting firm $41,000 for services over the past year, and his firm had claimed those payments as expenses on documents bearing my co-signature. I said I had the incorporation records, the invoice history, the bank transfers, and the UPS store box address. I said the registered agent's name was quite familiar to me. My daughter-in-law's face changed. Not dramatically, she was practiced at composure, but around the eyes, something tightened. Her father said, "That's a legitimate business arrangement. You're misunderstanding the structure. 31 years of forensic work, and I had never once had a legitimate business arrangement that needed a UPS box and a family member's maiden name to explain it." I told him that. My son tried a different approach. His voice went softer. He said they had been trying to protect me, that managing my own finances was getting harder than I realized, that the Meridian arrangement had been a way to consolidate resources, and that it was all documented and above board, and he would explain everything if I just came home with them after dinner. I opened the manila envelope. I placed the first page on the table. It was the handwriting analysis report. Authentic signature samples my signature from 30 documented sources compared against the 6 withdrawal slip signatures. The analyst's conclusion, in plain language at the bottom: the withdrawal slip signatures were not produced by the same person who signed the authentic samples. Probability of forgery: 97%. My son looked at the page. He did not pick it up. I placed the second document beside the first. Bank records: 27 withdrawals from the joint emergency account. Dates, amounts, descriptions. Total: $68,420. The third document: Meridian Incorporation records. His wife's maiden name. The UPS store address. Date of incorporation: 6 weeks after my wife's funeral. The fourth document: invoice records. Meridian billing my son's firm. My co-signature on the firm's financial disclosures that absorbed those fictional expenses. His father-in-law sat back in his chair. He crossed his arms. He said, "You're going to sit here on your birthday and accuse your own family." I said I was sitting here on my birthday presenting documented financial evidence of forgery, fraud, and the operation of a shell company designed to extract funds from a business in which I was an investor. I said I had not accused anyone. The documents spoke without any help from me. My son's wife reached for the handwriting report. I let her take it. She read it. Her husband read it over her shoulder. Her father stared at the middle distance the way people stare when they are revising a plan in real time. My son set the report down and said, "Dad, whatever you think you're looking at, it's not what it looks like." I have heard those words in depositions more times than I can count. They are always said in exactly that order, always in that tone, and they always mean the opposite of what they are claiming. I said, "Tell me what it looks like." He couldn't. He sat there for a full 10 seconds, which is a long time at a restaurant table in silence, and he could not produce an alternative explanation. His wife touched his arm. Her father cleared his throat. Then my son made the mistake I had been waiting for. Patience, again. Let the pattern complete. His voice changed. The softness left it. He leaned forward and said that if I filed any kind of complaint with the bank, with anyone, they would make sure the right people knew I wasn't managing well. That I had started forgetting things, that the Meadow Pines reservation existed for a reason. He said, "You're 68 years old and you live alone, and there is nobody else to tell a different story." His father-in-law nodded. His wife looked at the table. A threat. On the record, because I was recording it. I had a small digital recorder in my breast pocket, same pocket that had held the envelope. North Carolina one-party consent. I was present. Every word was legal. I had audio of this dinner. I had audio of the backyard conversation in March. I had audio of 11 phone calls between my son and his wife discussing the accounts, the invoices, the facility plan, and on one occasion, my son saying he wished things would just resolve themselves so they could stop managing the situation. I knew what resolve themselves meant. I had heard that language in fraud cases before. It meant they were waiting for me to become incapacitated or to die. I let my son finish his threat. Then I picked up my water glass and took a sip and set it down. I said, I have a full cognitive evaluation from my physician dated 3 weeks ago. Perfect scores across every assessment. I have been declared fully competent for all legal and financial decisions by a licensed geriatric specialist. I anticipated the incompetence angle. I closed it in September. My son's wife looked up from the table. I said, I also had my estate restructured in August. My investment accounts are in an irrevocable trust. My life insurance beneficiary was changed to the Asheville Children's Medical Foundation in July. My will, filed with my attorney in August, leaves my home and all remaining assets to the same foundation. It includes a disinheritance clause documenting the financial support I have provided you, $114,000 across 11 transfers, and specifying that this constitutes your inheritance in full. The table was very quiet. Her father said, You can't just disinherit your son. Courts look at that. I said that North Carolina had no forced heirship law for adult children. I had confirmed that with 3 separate estate attorneys, I could leave my assets to anyone I chose, and I had chosen to leave them to children who needed medical care. My son said my name, just my name, the way people do when everything else has run out. I pulled the last document from the envelope. It was a letter from my attorney. Notice of intent to file civil suit for recovery of debt. My son's name. My daughter-in-law is co-debtor, having co-signed 2 of the loan agreements. Amount claimed, $114,000, plus interest at the North Carolina legal rate. Payment terms, $800 monthly or lump sum settlement. Alternative, civil judgment, wage garnishment, credit reporting. I placed it in front of my son. Then I stood, left $400 on the table for the bill, and wished everyone a pleasant evening. I walked to my car, drove home through the October dark with the windows down, the mountain air cold and clean, and I felt something I had not felt in 14 months of quiet documentation. Not victory, not satisfaction. Just the specific stillness that comes when you have finally done the thing you knew needed doing. My attorney's name was Sandra Whitmore. I called her when I got home and told her the dinner had proceeded as anticipated. She said she would have the civil filing ready for Monday. I told her to go ahead. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was better than I had been in a long time. I made tea, sat in the kitchen. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when you have chosen the quiet rather than having it forced on you. My son called at 11. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a full 4 minutes long, cycling through anger and then explanation, and then something that wanted to be an apology without quite reaching one. I listened to it once, saved it. His wife called at 11:40. I let that go to voicemail too. Her father called at midnight. I blocked the number. Sunday morning I made coffee and eggs and ate at the kitchen table and read the news. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 11 text messages distributed among my son and his wife. The texts ranged from defensive to threatening to a final one from my son at 2 in the morning that read simply, "We need to fix this." I typed back, "The civil filing proceeds Monday, unless full repayment is received by end of business today." The forensic documentation has been submitted to the Buncombe County District Attorney's Office for review. Whether to pursue criminal charges is their determination, not mine. I am a witness and a victim. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. By Monday morning I had received no repayment. Sandra filed the civil complaint at 9 a.m. By noon my son had retained an attorney, which I knew because his attorney called Sandra and Sandra called me. His attorney had questions about the recording legality. Sandra explained North Carolina's one-party consent law patiently, as though it were not the 3rd time she had explained it in this case. That afternoon I received a voicemail from my son's wife. She had dropped the composure entirely. Her voice shook. She said I was destroying their lives over money, over a misunderstanding, over wounded pride. She said her father had made mistakes with the Meridian structure, but that it had not been intended to harm me, that it was a tax strategy that had been poorly communicated. She said that phrase, poorly communicated, and I thought about the 6 forged signatures on bank withdrawal slips and considered how one communicates a forged signature. I did not call her back. On Tuesday, I had coffee with my neighbor Barbara, who had been a close friend of my wife's, and who had watched my son grow up in this house. I told her something had happened between my son and me. I did not tell her the specifics. She said she was sorry. She said she had noticed over the past year that things seemed strained when she saw his car in the driveway. She asked if I was eating enough. I told her I was eating very well. She said good. That was the most comforting conversation I had in that entire period, partly because it asked nothing from me except an honest answer. Wednesday evening, my son appeared at the door, unannounced. I watched him on the security camera feed before I opened it. He stood on the porch for almost 2 minutes before knocking, which told me the conversation inside had been rehearsed and the delay was a last adjustment to the script. I opened the door but did not invite him in. He said he needed to talk to me. I said he could talk. He said he wanted to come inside. I said he was no longer on the emergency contact list for this property, that his key would need to be returned, and that if he wanted to discuss the civil matter, he was welcome to communicate through our respective attorneys. He looked at me for a long moment. The rehearsed script appeared to have covered most scenarios, but not this one. He said, "Dad, I am your son." I said, "I know who you are." He said, "You're going to end our relationship over money." I said I was ending our relationship over forgery, fraud, the operation of a shell company that extracted money from a business I invested in, and a recorded threat to have me institutionalized against my will. I said money was merely the instrument. The relationship had ended when he decided I was a resource rather than a person. He stood there. Something moved through his face that I could not categorize. It was not guilt exactly, and it was not anger exactly, and it was not grief exactly, but it had elements of all three. Then he said, "Mom would be devastated," and that was the one thing he could have said that landed. My wife would have been devastated. She loved her son without reservation, the way she loved everything completely, without performing the love for an audience. She would have sat at this kitchen table and cried, and then tried to find a way to reconcile the irreconcilable, but my wife was not here. My wife was gone. And if she had been here, none of this would have happened, because her presence alone made people want to be better than they were. I said, "Your mother would also have been devastated by forged signatures on bank documents. Take care of yourself." I closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the doorframe and listened to his footsteps cross the porch and descend the steps. His car door, the engine, the sound of it fading down the street. I returned to the kitchen and washed the coffee cup that was already clean. The civil case moved with the efficiency of solid documentation. Sandra had 31 years of my professional experience distilled into a 230-page binder, and opposing counsel, once he reviewed it, stopped asking about recording legality and started asking about settlement terms. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, my son and his wife signed a consent judgment, $122,000 including accrued interest, monthly payments of $900. Meridian Property Services LLC was dissolved. Its remaining assets, which amounted to less than $3,000, returned to my son's firm and credited against the debt. The handwriting analysis report was filed with the judgment as an exhibit. The district attorney's office reviewed the forgery evidence and issued a formal caution notice to my son with a note that the file would remain open. His father-in-law was not named in the civil judgment because my attorney and I made a calculated decision. The civil case against my son was airtight. Adding the father-in-law introduced complexity that would lengthen the process. But I did submit the Meridian Incorporation documents to the North Carolina Secretary of State's office for review of potential corporate fraud statutes. That process takes time. It was under review. The key to my house came back in an envelope with no note. I had the locks changed the same afternoon. My daughter-in-law called once more, 3 weeks into the payment arrangement. Her voice was different this time, flatter, without the strategic warmth she had deployed throughout the years of loans and Sunday dinners. She asked if I was satisfied. I asked what she meant. She said, "You got your money back, you destroyed a marriage. Are you satisfied?" I thought about that for a moment. I said that I had not destroyed their marriage. I had pursued legal remedy for documented financial crimes. Whatever damage had occurred to their marriage was a consequence of the choices they had made, not of my decision to hold them accountable for those choices. She said that was a very cold way to look at it. I told her I had spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. Precision was the professional habit. She hung up. I did not feel satisfaction. I want to be clear about that, because I think people expect a certain emotion at the end of a story like this one, and I don't want to misrepresent the reality. What I felt was something quieter, a settling, like a foundation that had been stressed returning to level. The house was my own again. My finances were structured and protected. My estate would go where I intended. Nobody had access to anything I had not explicitly authorized. My wife's photograph was still on the mantel. My granddaughter, my son's daughter, 9 years old, and innocent of everything that had happened, had drawn me a birthday card that arrived in the mail the week after the dinner. She had spelled my name wrong in the way children do when they are learning, and it was the most honest and uncomplicated thing I had received in months. I put it on the refrigerator. I did not reach out to my son about his daughter. He had primary custody. Whatever co-parenting arrangement he and his wife worked out was their determination. But I thought about my granddaughter with a kind of careful tenderness. She was not responsible for any of this. When she was older and could understand what had happened, if she wanted a relationship with her grandfather, that door would be open. I decided that quietly, without announcing it to anyone. I called the Asheville Children's Medical Foundation in November and arranged a meeting with their development director. I told her about the bequest in my estate documents. She was gracious and professional. She said the funds would support pediatric cancer research and treatment assistance for families without adequate insurance. I thought about 11 weeks of watching my wife in hospitals and what those weeks had cost, and what it would have meant to need help with those costs. I thought the money was going somewhere that made sense. January arrived. The first consent judgment payment came through on the 15th, exactly as agreed. My attorney confirmed receipt. I noted it in a simple ledger I kept on my desk, not out of distrust, but because 31 years of professional habit does not dissolve overnight. My neighbor Barbara and I started a standing Tuesday coffee, which had not been planned but simply accumulated into habit over the fall. She talked about her garden and her adult daughter in Raleigh and the historical novel she was reading. I talked about the mountains in winter and the Vanguard Fund rebalancing I had done in December, and occasionally, carefully, about my wife. Barbara had known her better than almost anyone and could tell me things about her that I had not known. Small things, the way my wife had cried at the end of certain movies but denied it, the way she had strong opinions about grocery store layouts that Barbara found hilarious. Those conversations were unexpectedly valuable. I am not a lonely man. I want to say that plainly, because people will assume otherwise. I live alone in a house I know and love, with work I still do occasionally as a consultant, with neighbors who are genuine rather than strategic, with a foundation that will carry my name forward in a way that matters to me. Solitude and loneliness are not the same condition. One is chosen, one is imposed. The difference is enormous. My son made his February payment, then his March payment, then his April payment. The consent judgment ran 11 years at the agreed monthly amount. Every payment documented, every payment received. He did not reach out between payments. I did not reach out between payments. There was nothing dishonest about that silence. It was simply the acknowledgement that the relationship we had was now a financial and legal one, and that was its honest form. Sandra Whitmore sent me a note in April. She had been practicing law for 28 years and had handled complex fraud cases throughout her career. She wrote that mine was one of the most methodically prepared victim documentation files she had encountered. Coming from her, that meant something. I wrote back and told her that the preparation had been the only thing that kept the situation from being something I could not undo. That was true. 4 months of quiet documentation while my son continued treating me like a problem to be managed. 4 months of recording, filing, auditing, restructuring, closing every angle before the confrontation arrived. In 31 years, I had seen what happened to fraud victims who did not document, who trusted their intuitions and their pain but could not prove them. Courts need evidence. Evidence needs preparation. The time I spent with the recorder and the binders and the handwriting analyst was not obsession. It was the minimum professional standard. I had applied to my own life what I had spent my career applying to corporate malfeasance. The only difference was that this case broke my heart, and the corporate cases never had. Spring came to Asheville. The dogwoods outside my kitchen window came back the way they always do, indifferent to everything that has happened in the house behind them, purely themselves on their own schedule, which I find instructive. On a Tuesday in April, Barbara and I had coffee, and she told me she had run into my son's wife at the farmer's market. She said she had looked tired. I said I was sorry to hear that. Barbara looked at me with the particular clarity she has and said, "You are sorry, aren't you?" It was not a question. I told her I was. Not for what I had done, for the fact that it had been necessary. She said she understood the difference. I believe she did. My granddaughter's birthday was in May. I sent a card and a gift card to a bookstore because she had told me once that she liked stories. I did not know if she would receive it, or whether my son would intercept it, or whether any of that would matter to a 9-year-old who simply liked stories. I sent it anyway. Some things you do not for the likely outcome, but for the record of having tried. I received a photograph in return, taken by her mother from the look of the angle my granddaughter holding 3 books, grinning with a gap in her front teeth that had not been there at Christmas. On the back, in her handwriting, large and uneven, "Thank you, Grandpa. I love you." She spelled Grandpa correctly this time. I put that photograph on the mantel next to my wife's. If you've been listening to this story, I hope something in it was useful to you. Not the legal specifics, every situation is different, and you should consult an attorney for your own circumstances. But the principle underneath it, that documentation matters. That patience matters. That being someone's parent, or child, or spouse, does not exempt anyone from accountability, including you, and that the most honest thing you can do for a relationship that has become dishonest is to stop pretending it is something it is not. My wife used to say that integrity was just the habit of choosing truth when lying would be easier. She meant it as a compliment when she said it about people she admired. I am trying, now, to mean it as a standard when I say it about myself. The house is quiet this evening. The mountains are still. The payment will come on the 15th. That is enough. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to Shadow Vengeance. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if you want to hear the next story, it's waiting for you in the box on the screen. Thank you for being here.